Chapter 222. Its sword. The silver human emperor was fully stretched out, and the 2-meter-long spear body was lifted. Li Tianlan's killing intent began to rise almost limitlessly. The feeling of being imprisoned grew stronger and stronger. He could clearly feel the existence of the shackle, as if someone had suppressed or temporarily erased some memories, which even affected his will that he had always thought was perfect. The feeling that he could touch it but could not break it became more and more obvious. Li Tianlan became more and more agitated and even vaguely felt that he was about to suffocate. Break the shackle. Li Tianlan suddenly let out a long roar, and the uncontrollable killing intent in the forest became boiling and violent. In this state, Li Tianlan was crazy, dangerous, and ferocious like a demon. Ice Bird and Black Shield seemed to have received a signal. Li Tianlan's long roar was so clear and undisguised. Without any hesitation, the two of them rushed over. Li Tianlan did not move. The two blue electric lights, which were extremely clear in the night, broke through the forest, approached quickly, and finally hovered in the air in front of him. How dare you stop? Ice Bird stood in front of the Black Shield and sneered. She was an extremely beautiful and charming woman. She had a plump figure and soft facial features, but her beautiful eyes were filled with cold light. She looked awe-inspiring and cold. She spoke Chinese, and her pronunciation was perfect. With just the two of you, you really dared to chase after me? Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but his momentum was completely violent. The crazy killing intent turned into sword intent as he spoke, and the whole forest seemed to be shaking under the sword intent. So what if there are only two of us? I admit that you have unlimited potential, but do you really think that you can make us fight with you now? If we hadn't been afraid that you would do something desperate, you would have fallen into our hands or become a dead man. Ice Bird said blandly. She was indeed a very charming woman, confident and peaceful. Even when she was hostile, she still maintained her demeanor. In the darkness with extremely low visibility, the blue electric lights made her indescribably dazzling, and her clothes fluttered in the wind, which was pleasing to the eye. Ha! Li Tianlan smiled, and the tranquility in his pupils had completely turned into a dead silence, which looked enchanting and deep. You're badly injured. I don't recommend fighting with us. If you're willing to go back to Dongdu with us, I can guarantee that East Island won't hurt you, and we'll give you the best treatment, power, status, women, whatever you want. You can even choose the inner princes of the imperial family. Ice Bird promised in a solemn and sincere tone. This was definitely not a lie, and it was even too general. Li Tianlan's value was definitely worth East Island's great efforts to win him over. If he was willing to join East Island, the royal family would do anything. After all, even if this young governor of Sai City in Jianghu State couldn't change the position of Sai City, he could influence Samsara Palace to a great extent. Besides, his potential was terrifying enough. If such a figure joined East Island, he could change more than just the Battle of Changdao, and he could even affect East Island's position in the Dark World in the future. If such a figure joined East Island sincerely, his position in East Island would probably surpass all the princes of the imperial family, and he would become one of the most important figures in the whole East Island in the future. Ice Bird's tone became more and more sincere, and she continued, as long as you're willing to join us, we're willing to help you investigate your father's treason case, and declare war on Kunlun City. We'll do our best to help you get revenge. Please believe in our sincerity. When the time was right, with Li Tianlan and the treason case as the primer, East Island was fully capable of setting off a storm in Jianghu State and seriously damaging the strength of Jianghu State. Ice Bird felt no pressure to make such a promise. Are you done? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. As he spoke, his hand holding the human emperor suddenly stabilized and no longer trembled. In an instant, the killing intent on Li Tianlan's body rose to the peak. Ice Bird frowned, but before she finished speaking, in her sight, Li Tianlan had already taken a gentle step forward. Dozens of meters away, a spot of silver light suddenly enlarged. Just one step. The ferocious and exquisite body of the human emperor, with a blazing fire, had already appeared in front of her chest. Li Tianlan was definitely a straightforward person. If he could make a move, he would never waste time. He barely suppressed the sharp pain in his body, and at the moment when his momentum was at its peak, he directly attacked without hesitation. Go all out. Ice Bird, who had been prepared for this, retreated in an instant. The dazzling lightning roared out around her in an instant. The twisted electric arc twisted and spread in the air, and the fire turned into sparks falling in the lightning. Only the silver spear was still stabbing straight ahead, pressing forward with indomitable will. Clang! A heavy long saber hacked hard on the human emperor, and the bright saber light was completely covered by the lightning. The blade cut through the air, and the sound was like thunder. The sound of gold and iron colliding rang out. A large expanse of lightning bloomed where the saber and the spear collided, and countless trees were completely shattered by the huge force. Ice Bird's figure was blocked by a burly and dark black shield. Black Shield was expressionless. He clenched the long saber with both hands, and the violent power suddenly poured into his arms. He chopped down hard with the saber. Li Tianlan did not dodge, but his figure became faint in an instant. There was only a shadow left in front of Black Shield, and Li Tianlan had already appeared behind him. The long spear whistled in the air, and the huge spear shadow smashed madly at Black Shield's back. The saber cut through the shadow. Black Shield growled, and the momentum of the saber instantly turned into a sweep. The heavy blade went up against the momentum. In the dazzling light and shadow, Li Tianlan pressed down wildly with the long spear in his hand, and at the same time, kicked Black Shield hard in the chest. Swish, the sharp sword cut through the air, and the sharp sound of the air being cut rang out. The sound seemed to come from afar, but in the blink of an eye, it had reached Li Tianlan's back. Dark Ambush. It was the most quintessential unique skill of Wuji Palace, which combined hiding, killing, dodging, and attacking. The figure of Ice Bird, who had been forced back by the spear, seemed to suddenly appear in the void. Holding a short saber, she became one with the saber and directly crashed into Li Tianlan. In the dazzling light and shadow, a roar suddenly came out that went straight into the sky. The sound was so fierce and clear, and it was a kind of madness and violence that ignored everything. The long spear moved rapidly along the blade, from the tip to the hilt, and Black Shield's hand holding the saber slid down. The ferocious and elegant spear tip and blade of the human emperor swept through the void. Spin. Controlling the sword with the spear. The eighth blade burning sky. Li Tianlan's already extremely high aura rose again in an instant. After successfully breaking through from the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak phase, Li Tianlan once again began to forcibly use his peak state. He did not forcibly restore to the thunder-shocking realm, but the power of this sword was infinitely close to the half-step thunder-shocking realm. With Li Tianlan as the center, the violent sword intent broke out unscrupulously around him. The flames rose to the sky, and the sword energy swept in all directions like a spreading halo. For a moment, both Black Shield and Ice Bird could not help but retreat. The two were facing in completely opposite directions. As they retreated, the distance between them was suddenly widened. Roar! Li Tianlan's body bore the great power beyond his realm, and the severe pain seemed to tear his flesh. He roared wildly, and the absolutely condensed willpower hit the shackles in his mind. The shackles were trembling, and Li Tianlan's body was also shaking. At all costs. Li Tianlan roared. In the sword intent of the eighth blade, which had not yet subsided, he suddenly raised his long spear and rushed to Ice Bird. There was no shadow formula or 24 moves of sword. The silver light whistled in the air. This was Li Tianlan's purest strength and speed. It was surging. Where the silver spear pointed, everything was destroyed. The sixth blade drifting cloud. It was the most distant and freehand move in the 24 moves of sword, but in Li Tianlan's hands, it became an extremely violent and domineering move. The long spear was like a meteor, stabbing Ice Bird in the air. The long spear was moving forward. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to have disappeared. There was only a silver spear left in Ice Bird's eyes. It was a pure spear, an arrogant spear, a spear that looked down on the world and regarded the whole world as nothing. At this moment, Li Tianlan's willpower was focused to the highest point in his life, and the strong shackles in his mind finally began to break bit by bit. Break. Ice Bird's sharp and long howl pierced the eardrums. In the face of this unavoidable blow, she did not step back at all. The short knife in her hand, which was different from the black shield style, was suddenly raised. She let go. The long knife hung in the air. Ice Bird's arms opened and shook violently. Lightning sputtered like a waterfall. A curtain-like light composed of pure lightning directly blocked in front of Ice Bird. The dazzling blue light was extremely restrained, and the lightning, which looked a little dim, was like water mist, completely blocked Ice Bird's figure behind. This was one of the strongest defensive unique skills in Wuji Palace, even in the entire East Island, and even in the entire Dark World. Invincible protection. In terms of defensive power, this was definitely the most headache-inducing unique skill. But the biggest drawback of this move was that it could not exist for a long time. To be exact, this light curtain could only exist for a short moment. But this moment was enough for Ice Bird. The moment the silver light in her sight was about to approach. The light curtain was completely formed. Boom! The silver spear and the light curtain collided fiercely. Li Tianlan's pupils were as bright as stars, and all his power burst out at the same time. Forward. He would rather die than retreat. The light curtain shook violently, and the almost invincible human emperor kept tightening. The body of the spear began to bend in the strong impact, as if it could not bear the gravity and was about to collapse. Ah 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 ah. Li Tianlan roared wildly. At the moment when his willpower rose to the apex, a slight cracking sound rang out, extremely clear. At this moment, Li Tianlan could clearly feel that the shackles in his mind were completely broken. Pictures suddenly appeared in his mind one after another. They were the suppressed memories, or rather, the suppressed willpower. The Li family has two unique skills. The map of God of War is well known in the world, and the other is not a unique skill, which is hypnosis. This is the extreme of hypnosis, which was left by the founder together with the map of God of War, just like the 24 moves of sword of the Li family. I can use this to suppress your willpower. If you can break through one day, you will be invincible when you are 30 years old. Those pictures that had been suppressed in the deepest part of his memory emerged one after another, more and more. With the soft bell sound in the depths of his memory that seemed to ripple into the depths of his soul, all kinds of pictures kept flashing. The human emperor kept hitting the light curtain in front of him. His willpower had a breakthrough in all aspects. Although his realm had not changed, his sword intent was several times sharper and purer than just now. You have to remember that the real invincibility is not the unique skill or the realm. For the Li family, the invincibility is the sword intent, and only the sword intent. I have a bright pearl. For me, my martial arts should not only be about the sword. The 24 moves of sword are the martial arts of the founder, but not all of them are mine. One day, I will surpass the founder. It had been locked up for a long time. I have been mediocre all my life. I seem to be high-spirited, but in fact, I am indecisive. Tianlan, I have a dilemma. I don't know how to make a decision, so I can only be impartial. You fight for the Li family. If one day you are smashed to pieces, I hope you won't blame me. What do you mean? If you can get out, you will know. I was wrong. Today, the dust had cleared. Some things are done. Remember, don't look back. It shone through the mountains and rivers. Boom! The tip of the spear was twisted in the light curtain. Ripples spread in the light curtain, turbulent, and finally broke. Pictures and a large number of memories hit his mind. The memory was so clear. Everything in his sight was so clear. The broken light curtain flew in all directions in the explosion. The absolute power exploded in the collision and directly turned into a wave of air filled with blue electric arcs. The air wave was spreading, and the forest within a radius of tens of meters was completely flattened in the deafening sound. The ice bird in the front and the black shield in the back were completely unbalanced in the air wave and flew backward. Li Tianlan was teetering in the center of the air wave, but his eyes had turned from trance to clarity. The ice bird with an incredulous face drifted in the air wave. This rare beauty in the dark world opened her small mouth and struggled in the air, looking helpless and delicate. It shone through the mountains and rivers, he whispered to himself and suddenly clenched the broken spear head of the human emperor. He lifted the pen and the spear. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his hand. The human emperor turned into a straight silver light in the air and was thrown out by him. The silver light flashed, and the sharpness was shocking. The human emperor drew a straight line in the air. In the irresistible sharpness, the broken spear head directly penetrated into the mouth of the ice bird. In an instant, the beautiful head completely shattered. In the darkest time before dawn, it directly burst into a mist of blood. When the darkness grew thicker, the morning was already close at hand. Where there was night, there would be morning. Chapter 223. As the most elite super-large comprehensive corps of Jianghu state, once a war broke out, the Border Praetorian Corps would be the first to be familiar with the enemy's artillery and the backbone to undertake a large number of combat tasks. In times of peace, it was the iron wall of Jianghu state, and in times of war, it was the sharp sword of Jianghu state. This super force of nearly 600,000 people had been given too many sacred duties by the whole Jianghu state since its establishment. It had been glorious to the peak and had fallen to the bottom. Since Dongxing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu state, took charge of the Border Control Corps, the light of the Border Control Corps was still dazzling. It was a blood-red light. Dongxing Wudi made the Border Control Corps because he pulled the most destitute Border Control Corps out of the shadow of the treason case. The Border Control Corps also made Dongxing Wudi. Because of the existence of the Border Control Corps, Dongxing Wudi's god of massacre could be famous in the dark world. Thunderbolt, Pegasus, Blood, Wild Sand, and Black Dragon. These 5 corps could be said to be the most important parts of the Border Praetorian Corps, and Dongxing Wudi basically spent most of the year in these 5 corps. The Pegasus Corps was stationed on the border of Tibet in Jianghu state. The headquarters of the Blood Battalion was located on the border of Nanyuan. The Wild Sand Battalion guarded the Beijiang of Jianghu state. The Black Dragon Corps guarded the northeast gate of Jianghu state. The Thunderbolt Corps was directly under the command of Dongxing Wudi, the commander of the Border Control Corps. It was also the smallest troop, with a total size of less than 20,000 people, but they were all the elites of the elites. Dongxing Wudi had been in control of the Border Control Corps for nearly 20 years, and the Thunderbolt Corps had always followed him. Wherever the god of massacre pointed, the Thunderbolt Corps would follow. This was a real battle-hardened army. Each of the more than 20,000 people in it could be said to be Dongxing Wudi's personal soldiers and the greatest pride of the Border Control Corps. The beginning of August was destined to be an eventful period in the dark world. North America was in turmoil, Northern Europe was in constant chaos, and the final battle of Changdao was hanging in the balance. East Asia was in turmoil again. There was a sudden chaos in the south of Annan state, which bordered Jianghu state. The Scorpion organization, which had disappeared in Annan state for nearly a decade, revived. As soon as it appeared, it had the momentum of starting a prairie fire. In just a few days, the Scorpion organization had occupied 3 cities in the south of Annan state. In less than 2 days, it was said that the Scorpion organization had more than 100,000 people. The Annan state was in chaos, and the international news was in an uproar. The Annan government, under great pressure, immediately transferred the military forces in the north to the southern battlefield to encircle the Scorpion organization. Intentionally or unintentionally, the northern part of Annan state bordering Nanyuan of Jianghu state became unprecedentedly empty. The land in the northern part of Annan state was now almost unguarded and exposed to the sight of Jianghu state. Under this kind of delicate and complicated situation, the nearly 20,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion were all dispatched, directly heading south into South Cloud Province. Marshal Dongxing Wudi, the god of massacre of Jianghu state, personally led the Thunderbolt Battalion to the headquarters of the Blood Battalion. For a moment, the whole world was shocked, and countless people's eyes began to shift from East Island to the border of Jianghu State. Even some countries that had cooperated with Jianghu State to suppress the currency of East Island expressed doubts. Regardless of whether they understood what was going on or not, their actions clearly expressed the hope that Jianghu State would remain rational. The Secretary of State of Star State even raised doubts at the United Nations meeting. He said that he did not understand the intention of the Thunderbolt Battalion of Jianghu State to suddenly go south, and further suggested that Jianghu State withdraw the Thunderbolt Battalion. The spokesman of Gaul also euphemistically said that when the northern part of Annan State was empty and its main force was suppressing the rebellion in the south, the behavior of the Thunderbolt Battalion going south would only cause panic and misunderstanding in Annan State. The spokesman of the British state was sharper. The other side almost made it clear that Jianghu State had bad intentions. He not only suggested that Jianghu State withdraw the Thunderbolt Battalion, but also suggested that the Blood Battalion stationed on the border of Nanyuan should also withdraw some distance at the same time to show sincerity. In this regard, the spokesman of Jianghu State who attended the United Nations meeting just sneered without any explanation. Dongxing Wudi was even more straightforward. In an environment where both sides were well aware of it, in the voice of doubt, the god of massacre of Jianghu State not only did not order a retreat, but directly ordered the Blood Battalion and the Thunderbolt Battalion to advance a distance of 10 kilometers. The international doubts turned into doubts, doubts into denunciations, denunciations eventually escalated into curses, and then almost repeated threats. Jianghu State kept silent. The Border Control Corps didn't say a word. They just did their own things despite the clamor of the outside world. The border of Nanyuan was sultry and oppressive. On a hillside less than 10 kilometers away from the border, Dongxing Wudi, who had just gotten up, flipped through the newspaper and narrowed his eyes slightly. The international pages of the newspaper were full of accusations and threats from other big countries against Jianghu State. The tone was tough, and the accusations were similar to taking advantage of others' difficulties and losing the demeanor of a superpower. Dongxing Wudi glanced at it a few times, threw the newspaper aside, and said with a sneer, "Clowns. They are good at acting, but that's all they can do. Sanctions? Bullshit." A strong man who was sleeping near him heard his voice, turned over in a daze, and sat up from the stall. Under the yellowish light, it could be clearly seen that the sweat on the man's face was flowing down. He looked at Dongxing Wudi, who had put on his military uniform, and said with a wry smile, "Marshal, don't you feel hot?" Although the conditions of the Blood Battalion are ordinary, in the temporary camp, the marshal's tent should be equipped with an air conditioner or an electric fan. "What are you doing?" As he said this, he stood up from the blanket. As he moved, his body was suddenly covered with a thin layer of ice. When the thin ice appeared, there was suddenly a little coolness in the stuffy tent. Experiencing life. Dongxing Wudi didn't look back. He lit a cigarette and said in a calm tone, "This damn life." The man cursed, looking puzzled. He was as tall as Dongxing Wudi. He was thin, but his face was extremely rough. His dark skin shone with an oily luster, and he looked extremely strong and fierce. However, at this time, this general of Jianghu State, whose words carried weight in the Blood Battalion, stood next to Dongxing Wudi, without any power. He was honest and even a little honest. General Wang Wandian, the commander of the Blood Battalion. This was Dongxing Wudi's old subordinate. He was also one of Dongxing Wudi's most trusted people in the Border Control Corps. There is a place near here that also has no air conditioner or electric fan. It has been many years. Dongxing Wudi walked out of the tent with a cigarette in his mouth, and his expression was calm. "I'm going out for a walk." More than 100,000 people in the Blood Battalion, plus less than 20,000 people in the Thunderbolt Battalion, had dispersed 2 days ago. The army was scattered on the long border, ready to fight. At this time, Dongxing Wudi was at the forefront of the border. Only 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion were left here. The 10,000 people used this hillside closest to the border as a temporary camp. A large number of tents were pitched on the ground, endless. Although it was not as desolate and heroic as the headquarters of the Blood Battalion, it had its own silent and iron-blooded flavor. Dongqing Wudi moved forward slowly. After less than a kilometer, there appeared a big drum with a diameter of nearly 5 meters in front of him. The material of the big drum was like wood. It had stood on the border for decades, weathered by the wind and the sun, but it had not changed at all. This drum was called Family and Country, and 19 years ago, it was called Xianyuan. This was a big drum that could withstand the full force of a half-step invincible realm expert. This was the big drum that Li Honghe, the patriarch of the Li family, had personally built on the border. There were 13 big drums on the border between Nanyun and Annan State. When the war broke out, the sound of the drums was enough to spread over hundreds of kilometers of the border. When the war broke out, when all advanced means of communication were ineffective, the way of drumming became particularly important. Therefore, the drum language was basically something that every soldier of the Border Praetorian Corps could understand. Dongqing Wudi came to the big drum and picked up the drumsticks. When the sun rose on the horizon, the dull drum sound vibrated several times in an instant, spreading through the mountains and rushing into the forest. After a while, the 13 big drums sounded at the same time. The drum sound was dull, resounding through the border, but conveying only one meaning. In this battle, no one was left alive. All the soldiers heard it. And now, in a small camp that did not belong to the Border Praetorian Corps, in a meteorite forest on the border, everyone also heard it. The drum sound was vague and clear. It spread to this camp and also broke the silence of this camp. In an attic near the center of the camp, Li Honghe, who had stayed here for nearly 20 years, walked out of the door and looked at the distant sky in a trance. Listening to the drum sound that seemed to be near and far, he murmured, "It's Xianyuan. No, it's the homeland now." The morning wind blew his shabby clothes. The old man slowly went downstairs with a complicated expression. All the people in the camp were awakened by the drum sound. They silently walked out of their dormitories and came to the old man. The old man walked to the center of the camp and stood under the Zhongzhou state star flag fluttering in the camp. He looked at the flying flag in silence. After a long while, he took a gentle step forward. "Your Highness," in the crowd gathered behind him, a voice sounded in a complicated tone. Li Honghe slowly turned around and looked at these old subordinates who had been with the Li family for many years, with a peaceful look in his eyes. In his sight, there were faces full of entanglement. The knot in your heart hasn't been solved. After a long silence, he looked at the crowd in front of him and suddenly asked with a chuckle, "How to solve it?" Another voice sounded in the crowd, full of bitterness and even a little ferocious. Li Honghe didn't look at who was speaking, but said gently, "If you can't solve it, then don't. We're soldiers. The drum of the homeland is beating, and the war is about to start. What do you think I should do?" There was only silence in the crowd. Dead silence. No one spoke. Li Honghe looked at them quietly. There was no disappointment or joy in his eyes, only calmness. After a long time, Li Honghe slowly turned around and slowly reached out to the star flag standing in front of him. "I can understand you, so, you don't have to ask me where you're going. I'm not the god of war, but I'm still a soldier. So, I'll go." He paused and continued, "You can stay or go to the war, but you don't have to go with me." He abruptly exerted strength in his hand that was holding the flagpole and directly uprooted the flagpole that was several meters tall. The scarlet star flag surged in his hand and made a loud noise. Li Honghe's eyes were in a trance. He looked up at the scarlet above his sight and muttered to himself, "Old buddy, let's go." Chapter 224. When the dull drums echoed clearly on the border, General Wang Wandian, the commander of the Blood Battalion, also walked out of the tent and came behind Dongqing Wudi. Wang Wandian, dressed in military uniform, stood tall and straight. The golden general star shone in the sunlight. He stood upright behind Dongqing Wudi with a solemn expression, looking determined and decisive, full of murderous intent. Murderous intent. This was something that had been injected into everyone since the establishment of the Border Praetorian Corps, and it was carried forward in Dongqing Wudi's hands. For many years, the Border Control Corps could be said to be the most bloodthirsty army in the world. Have they arrived yet? The drums vibrated in the air. Dongxing Wudi, who was also in military uniform, had put down the drumsticks and turned to ask Wang Wandian behind him. They're all on the way. Wang Wandian nodded and said, I just called Han Bing. He should be able to arrive first. General Wang Wandian, the commander of the Blood Battalion. General Shi Hanbing, the commander of the Wild Sand Battalion. General Xiao Dongzhan, the commander of the Pegasus Battalion. General Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion. These four, together with Thunder God, the deputy commander of the Thunderbolt Battalion from the Dongqing clan, could be said to be the strongest 5 tiger generals in Dongxing Wudi's hands and one of the pillars of the entire Border Control Corps. When the entire Border Control Corps was under international public opinion, no one expected that Dongxing Wudi not only remained unmoved, but also directly conveyed a secret military order to let the commanders of the other 3 legions rush to the Nanyuan border overnight. However, such news could not be kept a secret. It might be leaked in one day at the latest. One day later, where would they be? Wang Wandian was in a daze and subconsciously looked at Dongxing Wudi in front of him. It seemed that the marshal did not want to hide such news from the beginning. Pass the order. Dongxing Wudi's cold voice sounded in front of him. Wang Wandian stood up straight reflexively. At this moment, the general, who was also famous in Jianghu state, seemed to have become the rash young man who charged recklessly after receiving Dongxing Wudi's order many years ago. Let Shi Hanbing come to see me. Cheng Huaining goes to line 2, and Xiao Dongzhan to line 3. Don't take the initiative to attack unless there are special circumstances. Dongxing Wudi said slowly. Wang Wandian responded instinctively. Then, he asked blankly, Marshal, are we going to make a move now? After all, Dongxing Wudi arrived at the Blood Battalion in a hurry. When the news of the Scorpion organization of Annan State reached Jianghu State, Dongxing Wudi rushed over as soon as possible, but it only took him 2 days. So many arrangements were made in a hurry and even a little rough. He only made a general arrangement. Nearly 200,000 people of the Blood Battalion had been scattered on the border of Nanyuan and were simply divided into several key points. The headquarters of the Blood Battalion was the number 1 point, with the fewest personnel left behind, but the most heavy firepower. The west side of the border was point 2, and the east side was point 3. The number of people was roughly equal. 3 points, more than 100,000 people, had firmly guarded the territory of Jianghu State. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongxing Wudi were at the forefront. They were not responsible for guarding, but taking the initiative to attack. Therefore, Dongxing Wudi called in the commanders of the other 3 legions and left Wang Wandian and Shi Hanbing at the forefront. Shi Hanbing and Wang Wandian followed Dongxing Wudi the earliest, and their strength was also the strongest. Both of them were very close to Dongxing Wudi's strength. The 3 masters, plus the 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion, formed the sharpest knife on the border of Nanyuan. Now the commanders of the other 3 legions had arrived at the border. With the 3 of them in place, everything seemed to be ready. It's not us who are going to move. It's them. Dongxing Wudi sneered and pointed to the direction of Annan State outside the border. His eyes were bloodthirsty and cold. He looked up at the rising sun in the east, took a deep breath, and whispered, It's the 5th day. If we don't move now, they won't have time. Damn it. Wang Wandian clenched his fist, and the dazzling blue lightning bloomed in his palm. In a trance, it seemed to overwhelm the sun on the horizon. Those people are so damn shameless. How dare they put pressure on us at the United Nations? Bullshit. Bad intentions? Who on earth has bad intentions? What are they? Who doesn't know that the Scorpion organization was subdued by Annan State several years ago? The whole Scorpion organization has been F*King reorganized into the Scorpion Corps. Rebellion? F*CK them. Enough. Dongxing Wudi said in a very low tone. His whole body was bathed in the rising golden sun, and his expression could not be seen. Wang Wandian shut his mouth with hatred. The Scorpion Rebellion is a rebellion. Now the northern forces of Annan State are empty. That's a fact. Dongqing Wudi said blandly. But they are not empty at all. The northern army did not move at all, but, Wang Wandian shouted with a fiery temper. You stubborn donkey, it's none of your business whether the Scorpion organization rebelled or not. If Annan State says there is a rebellion, then there is a rebellion. Isn't it normal for them to transfer troops from the north to suppress the rebellion? As for who and how many people will appear in the north of Annan State, it's none of Annan State's business. They have limited energy, so they are busy suppressing the rebellion. You have to tell the truth, you know. Do you think the international public opinion is not lively enough? A helpless voice suddenly rang out behind Wang Wandian. It was cold and indifferent. In the sun, a tall, thin, and somewhat slender figure came slowly. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi, who had a smile at the corner of his mouth. He gave a military salute and said respectfully, Marshal. Shi Hanbing was just like his name. He was cold and expressionless. He had an unapproachable aura all over his body. Even in front of his immediate superior and old brothers, the indifference on his body only melted a little. Damn ice block, who are you calling stubborn donkey? Don't I understand what's going on? I just can't bear it. Wang Wandian stared at him and swore. That's enough. Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. Annan State is in the north. No, how many troops does the Scorpion have in the north of Annan State? It was a bit inappropriate, but Wang Wandian answered honestly, about 90,000 Annan State troops. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and said nothing. Now there are no troops in the north of Annan State, only the rebels of the Scorpion. Shi Hanbing reminded him calmly. Bullshit. Wang Wandian snorted. Do you really think you're different after changing the flag? They haven't even changed the equipment of the base. I can call them whatever I want. Time is short. We don't have time to arrange too much, and neither does Annan State. But stubborn donkey, if you don't want to get into trouble, you have to admit that they have nothing to do with Annan State. No matter how many people we kill today, they are the rebels of the Scorpion. Shi Hanbing's tone was flat. I just don't know how many chips those people have given Annan State. Can they really afford such a big gamble? The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, the Jianghu family of South America, the Fantasy World, and Knights Templars, these 5 forces together, what chips can't they give? If necessary, Annan State is likely to say that all its troops are rebels. But now it seems that they still want to save face, so they didn't go too far. Dongqing Wudi said blandly, but the number is not small. 90,000 people, plus the elites of the 5 forces, maybe they think it's enough? Marshal, they don't come with good intentions. Shi Hanbing reminded him in a serious tone. The final battle of Changdao had broken out, and the power of Jianghu State was now completely scattered. There were people of Jianghu State in Northern Europe, North America, and East Island. It was hard to say how much extra power Jianghu State had to pay attention to the border. Now it was the 5th day of the 7 days. The 5 forces took advantage of the scattered power of Jianghu State to plot the border. They would do anything. As long as they succeeded, they could even give up the interests of East Island. For the 5 forces, the best way was to end the war quickly and decide everything in 1 or 2 days. Otherwise, when the Battle of Changdao was over and Jianghu State withdrew part of its power, everything would be too late. After all, this was different from the final Battle of Changdao. When Jianghu State plotted against East Island, the Dark Forces were the first to take action, but the 5 forces were directly attacking the army of Jianghu State with the help of the rebels. This was completely different. Jianghu State didn't need to pay attention to any means or rules to deal with the rebels and invaders. Therefore, in 2 days, they had to occupy Nanyun province and at least completely swallow the Blood Battalion of nearly 200,000 people. This was the common demand of the 5 forces. Now the final battle of Changdao had reached a critical moment. Once the war broke out at the border of Jianghu State, it could not only restrain the experts of Jianghu State who wanted to go to Changdao for support, but also put great psychological pressure on the people of Jianghu state in North America and Northern Europe. This was the conspiracy of the five forces. Even at the border, Jianghu state, which had the home advantage, might not be able to gain any advantage. It was no exaggeration to say that once the war started, the four battlefields would be full of variables. However, the biggest variable was not in these four battlefields. "Marshal, are the higher-ups ready?" Shi Hanbing asked in a low voice. "Yes, but the opponents are not idle. We can only fight to the death." Dongqing Wudi shook his head and sighed. Shi Hanbing moved the corner of his mouth and murmured, "The most important thing is Huading. Huading. Huading." Wang Wantian's body shook violently. At this time, Huading seemed calm and peaceful, but inside Huading, there were 5 invincible realm experts and countless foreign elites. Jianghu state was close to its limit by dividing 3 battlefields. If the border conflict broke out, how much power could Jianghu state spare to support the border control corps? Too little didn't work. If there were too many, what about Huading? The general trend was in chaos. Maybe Dongqing Wudi was right. Even if they were prepared, under the change of the general trend, all they could do was to fight to the death. Chapter 225. The spear was awe-inspiring. It stood quietly on the ground, but it had a kind of spirit to roar between heaven and earth. It was an extraordinary spear. The spear was nearly 3 meters long, and its entire body was jet black. It was huge and heavy, and its black body was engraved with dense embossed patterns that extended from the butt of the spear all the way to the barrel, and then back again. The complicated patterns were connected to the exceptionally huge trigger, and it was done in one go, as smooth as flowing water. An extraordinary spear. An earth-shaking spear. It was not ferocious or domineering, but it had an irresistible majesty. A big slender hand held the spear. The large sniper rifle, nearly 3 meters long, was raised by one hand and pointed to the distant sky outside the window. With a spear in hand, it shot into the sky. The invincible spear and the invincible man were the best in the world. Good spear. An old sigh with a smile came from behind. My nephew's greatest wish in his life is to develop a real famous gun. We have mad shot and sky attack, but they are all failures. There is still a long way to go before we can develop a real famous gun. What can be used is the best. Although a famous gun is strong, how many people can exert its greatest power? Even I can pull the trigger, but the trigger can't be pressed to the bottom. I can't exert its greatest power. It's a pity in my life. For hundreds of years, it must be the loneliest. Wang Tianzong stroked the big black spear in his hand gently. The black sniper rifle glowed, and the body of the spear seemed to be slightly distorted. The complicated patterns were also gently fluctuating and turning into other shapes. Famous guns are all alive. How can it be possible to force it with a dead thing? Wang Tianzong held the big black spear in his hand and continued to speak. My old man doesn't understand these things. Let him study it. At least it's not a bad thing. Dongqing Hanguang, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, said with a smile. Wang Tianzong smiled and said no more. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The old patriarch of the Dongqing clan. The two standing together had an extraordinary meaning for the whole Jianghu state. In fact, when the 7-day period of East Island spread to Jianghu state, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city had already started a series of contests. Although the contest was short, it was quite fierce. The final result was finally determined on the morning of the 5th day. Wang Tianzong appeared beside Dongqing Hanguang, while Gu Xingyin stayed in Huading. The winner and loser were clear. But it was still hard to say who suffered a loss, the Wang family of Beihai or Kunlun city. Old master, did I disappoint you by appearing here? Wang Tianzong turned around with a faint smile on his face and chuckled. Is there any difference? Is there? Dongqing Hanguang said calmly. Having retired for many years, the old master didn't care about worldly affairs, so he didn't beat around the bush. He was surprisingly frank. Neither you nor Gu Xingyun are the candidates I want. I don. Two of you. And two. And I have you both of you. And I and you. There is still a difference. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window calmly. I know who you are thinking of. Situ Cangyue is not in Jianghu state. Even if she is, she may not be able to survive this battle. In contrast, I think I am the most suitable choice. Dongxing Hongguang shook his head and said with a smile, maybe. Over the border of Nanyun, the helicopter flew at a low altitude, and the huge whistling sound of the rotors surged in the wind. Looking down through the cabin window, the large canopy of the primeval forest below rose and fell like waves as the helicopter moved forward. Who do you think will come this time? Dongxing Hongguang asked suddenly. Who knows? In such a big game, the one who comes will definitely come back, and it's a big guy. We can't know who it is until we see it. Wang Tianzong responded casually. You are confident. Dongxing Hongguang's tone was indifferent. It was hard to tell whether he was sighing with emotion or mocking. Wang Tianzong said softly in a calm tone, I am invincible. Dongxing Hongguang snorted. He seemed to want to refute something, but he didn't know how, so he could only close his eyes and rest. Why are you angry, old master? Although the Wang family of Beihai took advantage of the Dongxing clan this time, there will always be returns in the future. Brother Invincible won't be able to stay in the Border Control Corps for long, right? The Wang family of Beihai is willing to contribute to the future layout. Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled and said in a sincere tone. Dongxing Hongguang didn't open his eyes, but said in a cold tone, if Gu Xingyun were here, I'm afraid he would give more. Indeed. Wang Tianzong agreed and said with a chuckle, but it's a pity that he can't come. In the three-party game, Old Master has gained enough. Why do you take it seriously? We've already given out enough. Dongxing Hongguang sneered and said with no expression, if the Dongxing clan had an invincible realm expert, why would they take advantage of you now? The martial arts of the Dongxing clan specializes in killing intent, and there was indeed a famous figure in the dark world. In fact, it should be your father's generation, right? But later, you integrated the martial arts of Jade Pool and wanted to integrate killing intent and outburst. Now it seems that the effect is not so good. Maybe it has. It's not conclusive yet. Dongxing Hongguang interrupted Wang Tianzong. It's just 2 generations. The Dongxing clan will definitely have the strongest invincible realm expert, either now or in the future. Really? Wang Tianzong asked with a smile, but his eyes were shining with inexplicable brilliance. Dongxing Hongguang seemed to realize that he had said something wrong. His face changed slightly, and he glared at Wang Tianzong without saying anything. The helicopter flew over the primeval forest and quickly approached the border. They're coming. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window and suddenly said. In his sight, the 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongxing Wudi had appeared in front of him. Farther away, through the primeval forest, standing on the helicopter and looking down, countless dense figures were constantly rushing forward. Countless figures were reuniting one after another. It was the territory of Annan State, but the vanguard troops had entered the border of Jianghu State. It was mighty. Like a black tide. Dongxing Hongguang was already standing beside Wang Tianzong, looking at the black tide at the end of his sight with a solemn expression. I'm going. Wang Tianzong said slowly. He opened the door of the cabin and jumped down without hesitation. The wind was cold in the air. The black big spear in his hand was constantly deformed, broken, and twisted in the violent wind. The unknown black metal changed very quickly. Finally, the big spear disappeared, and in Wang Tianzong's hand, there was a ferocious-looking black arm guard. His body fell to the ground, and he looked at the arm guard on his right hand that covered his whole arm, expressionless. The 5 superpowers in the Dark World conspired to the border of Jianghu State and even used Annan State. This move made it clear that they wanted to annex the entire Blood Battalion and even Nanyun Province. Such a big plot, there must be a final figure. Knowing that he and Gu Xingyan were in Jianghu state, such a final figure was definitely a top enemy on the divine list. Wang Tianzong's biggest task in coming to the border this time was to kill the invincible realm expert pushed out by the 5 superpowers. As long as the opponent died, it would be time for Jianghu state to fight back. The general trend was turbulent. A slight tilt of the delicate balance was enough to affect the outcome. Wang Tianzong calmly stroked the black arm guard on his hand. The murderous weapon was in his hand. He was fearless. This black big spear and this black arm guard were the most precious weapons of the Wang family of Beihai. It ranked first among the 12 murderous weapons in the dark world. The spear was named Human Emperor. The black tide rushed to the border. Tens of thousands of people charged from different directions, and the entire border jungle was shaking. But there was dead silence in front of Dongqing Wudi. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion had already assembled. People all over the mountains stood in front of Dongqing Wudi in silence. Only their fanatical eyes were focused on Dongqing Wudi. There was no fear, only the most unyielding fighting spirit. Dongqing Wudi stood calmly under the war drum of the family and country. His face was calm. The footsteps at the border rushed over like a landslide and a tsunami, getting closer and closer. Vigorous and vigorous. Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent, finally took a step forward. There was no blood-boiling speech. His voice was very calm, and within the calmness, there was a kind of craziness that was suppressed to the extreme. If the armed forces of other countries enter the border of Jianghu state, they are invaders. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, which was not loud but clearly sounded in everyone's ears. The enemy is coming. Thunderbolt Battalion, follow me to kill the enemy. None of our enemies will survive. Kill. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion roared at the same time, like a tsunami. To Jianghu state. Facing everyone, the most legendary marshal of Jianghu state picked up his kettle and looked solemn. To the marshal. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion picked up their kettles at the same time and said in unison. Dongqing Wudi suddenly burst out laughing. He raised his head, poured all the liquor in the kettle into his mouth, and threw the kettle away. He turned around. In his sight, countless enemies rushed forward, all dressed in black. The vanguard troops had rushed into the forest. The mountains and plains were all covered with black clothes. They were armed to the teeth. Dongqing Wudi's eyes flashed with a trace of amazing killing intent, and he suddenly reached out his hand. Under the war drum of the family and country, the drumstick suddenly fell into Dongqing Wudi's hands. Dongqing Wudi strode forward, and the drumsticks fell on the war drum of the family and country with all their strength. The fierce drumming sounded throughout the border in an instant. The war drum was like thunder, and the sound wave that swept everything went straight into the sky and shook the clouds away. Dongqing Wudi's roar sounded in the drumming, with the heroism and fighting spirit from the soul, shaking the sky. Chapter 226. The Thunderbolt Battalion marched on. The Blood Battalion defended to the death. This was the plan that had been made from the beginning. The war this time could be said to be unexpected. Time was tight, and neither side was fully prepared. Once the real battle began, it would be a battle of fighting spirit. The scorching sun covered the barren mountains of the western region of Nanyun. Under the scorching sun, groups of soldiers of the Blood Battalion were busy shuttling back and forth. The military trucks at the foot of the mountain stopped and went. More and more heavy firepower weapons approached the barren mountains, and the whole mountain was in a solemn atmosphere. Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, stood quietly on the top of the mountain and looked at the busy scene below with a solemn face. The general, who had been guarding the northeast border of Jianghu state all year round, did not look like a soldier at all. He was thin, elegant, and looked gentle. If he took off the prestigious military uniform, he would look more like a knowledgeable and gentle professor and scholar, or a Confucian general. The drums surged in the air like thunder. 13 family country drums sounded at the same time, covering the whole border of Nanyun. The drums were rough and heroic, with a kind of power that was enough to shake the soul. Qing Huaining listened to the drums that were getting more and more intense. Instead of being excited, a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead, and he looked eager and anxious. Hurry up. The movements of the soldiers at the foot of the mountain were nervous but orderly. Qing Huaining wiped the sweat on his forehead and whispered to himself. Huaining, the marshal has begun to exchange fire. In the war drums that shook the sky, a middle-aged man in the military uniform of a major general quickly passed through the busy crowd and rushed directly to the top of the mountain. It's not surprising. Qing Huaining shook his head with a solemn face, pointed to the direction of the drums, and said, "Listen to the drums and you will know." "Jijing, how much time do we need?" The corner of the major general's mouth moved, and his face was a little gloomy and decadent. He was originally a very handsome man, but at this time, his face was indescribably ugly. "About 3 hours. He gritted his teeth and whispered, "It will take at least 2.5 hours for us to build a perfect line of defense." 2.5 hours, Qing Huaining shook his head with a wry smile and said calmly, "There is definitely not enough time." "I know." Bai Zhijing growled, his handsome face a little ferocious. "But I know my troops. This is the fastest we can do. There's no better way." Bai Zhijing, one of the core figures of the Bai family in the giant group of Jianghu state, was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Blood Battalion. The 2nd Division was a mountain combat division. Although its comprehensive strength was not the top in the Blood Battalion, its equipment configuration and daily training were most suitable for mountain combat. This place was infinitely close to the border. In front of it was a wasteland of Annan state, and behind it was a primeval forest. The rolling mountains in the middle were the most suitable battlefield for Bai Zhijing and his 2nd Division. After a preliminary inspection of the terrain, Dongqing Wudi directly ordered Bai Zhijing to lead the 2nd Division to form the first line of defense in the western region here. However, compared with the 5 dark forces, Jianghu state's preparation was still too inadequate. It took time to study the terrain, execute the battle plan, arrange the troops, mobilize the troops, and set up the defense line. Although the efficiency of the Border Control Corps was amazing, it involved more than 100,000 troops. After doing one thing after another, it finally came to this moment. Now most of the things had been done, except for the last step. Batch after batch of heavy firepower weapons were being transferred from the headquarters of the Blood Battalion, installed and erected, and finally formed an extremely powerful line of fire on the border. Once this work was done, it would be much easier to just defend, and the pressure on the entire border would be reduced. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time now. The 10,000 elites led by Dongqing Wudi were in front of them on the right. The vertical distance between the two sides was about 5 kilometers, not counting the left and right sides. At this time, the drums of the family country war shook the sky, which fully showed that Dongqing Wudi had begun to fight with the dark forces of the martial arts university. This also showed that in their direction, the enemy was also on the way to charge, and they were at most 5 kilometers away from here. After all, they could not charge in batches. In a time crunch, the other side would definitely press all at once. It would take the 2nd Division another 2.5 hours to build a perfect line of defense. But the enemy's rapid march of 5 kilometers, no matter how many people there were, could not take so long. At most, an hour would be enough. The remaining 1.5 hours was the most difficult test for Qing Huaining and Bai Zhijing. They had only 2 choices. The first was to use the lives of the soldiers of the 2nd Division to buy time and set up the line of fire. However, in this way, most of the troops of the 2nd Division would be transferred, and a small number of people would set up the line of fire, which was bound to take longer. As for whether it would succeed in the end, no one was sure. The second choice was to retreat now and give up this mountain. How to choose? Qing Huaining's forehead was sweating more and more, but his eyes were still calm as ever. His eyes slowly swept over the mountains, and he was silent. This mountain range could be said to be the most favorable terrain in the western region. It was nearly 6 kilometers long, but both sides were peaks. The mountains were not high, but the slope was very steep, which could be said to be a natural stronghold. Only the slope where he was now had a slightly lower slope. If the enemy wanted to enter Jianghu state, this could be said to be the only way. However, this slope was only about 300 meters wide, and both sides were steep mountain walls. If he guarded here, it could be said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. Such an important terrain could be said to be a battleground. From the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic to the past few decades, Jianghu state and Annan state had been in constant conflict over this place, and countless disputes, large and small, had broken out. For the western region of Nanyuan and Jianghu state, this was completely a natural gateway, and they had to defend here even if they died. We can't retreat. Cheng Huaining suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was very soft, but his calm eyes flickered with the light of determination. Bai Zhijing suddenly raised his head and glared at Cheng Huaining. He opened his mouth, but did not know what to say. As long as we hold this place, we can buy time for several lines of defense in the rear. The enemy wants to invade from the western region. This is the only way, unless they are willing to take a detour of dozens of kilometers to step on the minefield that has existed for many years. Zhijing, we are not ready, nor are the lines of defense in the rear. In any case, we can't retreat. Cheng Huaining's tone became calmer and calmer. But if we retreat and they chase after us, it will also take time. Bai Zhijing clenched his fists tightly and growled with a distorted face. Stupid. Cheng Huaining's face darkened, and he said coldly, this place is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we really abandon this place, once the enemy enters the territory and scatters, there will be endless troubles in the future. And if we retreat without fighting, this place is equivalent to directly giving it to the enemy. Once the enemy occupies this place, how can they easily hand it over? At that time, the western region of Nanyuan and Jianghu state may be bounded by this place. Even if we want to fight, don't you understand how much it will cost us in this terrain? If you feel sorry for your troops now, they will all be sacrificed sooner or later in the future. Bai Zhijing closed his eyes in pain, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he couldn't speak. How could he not understand the general principle? He didn't want to retreat either. Since the establishment of the Border Control Corps, there had never been a deserter, whether it was a big or a small battle. But in this situation, if he wanted to defend to the death and the line of fire had not been set up, he would be fighting with his troops. How many people in the 2nd Division would die in this battle? As long as he thought about it, Bai Zhijing's heart couldn't help but twitch. You know what you should do. Cheng Huaining took a deep look at Bai Zhijing and patted him on the shoulder with his big hand. If we retreat from here, our rear will be exposed. Although our place here is not as important as the main battlefield on the Marshal's side, it is equally important. The enemy's target is the entire Blood Battalion. If we let them break in from here, the enemy will keep coming, and then the Blood Battalion will be in danger. If the Blood Battalion is really wiped out or severely damaged, even if we win in East Island, the gain will be limited. After all, there are nearly 160,000 people in the Blood Battalion. If they are gone, how can Jianghu state fill this hole? With what? By relying on those pampered elites in the inland? And don't forget, even if we win the final battle of Changdao, we need to send people to guard. If the Blood Battalion is destroyed, the Snowdance Corps, which should be guarding in Changdao, is likely to be used to fill the vacancy in the Blood Battalion. In the end, what can we get? There's also Huading. When the battle breaks out here, Huading will also be in danger. We're prepared, but the other side won't be idle. Otherwise, from the beginning of the final battle of Changdao, we will regard it as the power of the whole country. In the general trend, everyone has to do their best. The international battlefield is full of smoke. No matter how much advantage you have, one wrong step often leads to the loss of the whole game. Zhijing, if we take one wrong step today, we may be the sinners of Jianghu state in the future. Don't you understand this? Cheng Huaining's tone became harsher and harsher, and an unparalleled power burst out of him. Bai Zhijing's body trembled uncontrollably. He clenched his fists and said in a hoarse voice, I understand. You don't have to say it. The second division will go up, and I will stand at the forefront and fight to the death. I will fight for time for the Blood Battalion and the western region of Nanyun with you. Cheng Huaining looked ahead with a gentle and elegant smile. At the end of his sight, a vast darkness gradually appeared on the Annan plain. Dust was rising, and the earth was shaking. Let me do it. An old and gentle voice suddenly rang out in the mountains. The voice was not high, gentle and quiet, but it rang clearly in everyone's ears, calm and confident. Cheng Huaining and Bai Zhijing, who were staring ahead with a serious face, suddenly turned around. In their sight was the vast forest, the constant transport vehicles, and the busy soldiers. But deep in the forest, there was a kind of momentum that could make all living beings tremble. It was surging and unparalleled in the world. An old star flag of Jianghu state appeared in everyone's sight. The flagpole, which was more than 10 meters long, was held in someone's hand. The cold wind blew in the forest, but the huge flag at the end of the flagpole was stagnant like a knife, motionless. The old man holding the star flag suddenly appeared. He walked out of the forest unhurriedly, but with every step, he crossed a distance of tens of meters and quickly approached the mountain range. That kind of trembling momentum kept rising, mighty in the valley of the western region, and the fighting intent soared to the ninth heaven. The scarlet flag, which was stagnant like a knife. The shabby clothes. The old face. The fighting intent soared to the ninth heaven. At this moment, the man and the flag seemed to fill the whole world. He was indomitable. Stop. The outermost patrol soldiers finally reacted. They subconsciously held up the guns in their hands and pointed at the old man. In the face of the great battle, an unidentified but ridiculously strong old man came to the battlefield alone with the star flag. This matter was weird. The patrol soldiers would never believe that the old man was one of them because of a flag in his hand. Who are you? Among the patrol soldiers, a first lieutenant held the gun in his hand tightly and looked at the old man in front of him calmly. I am. The old man held the flagpole and stood in front of the patrol team. His eyes seemed to be in a trance. I'm a veteran of Jianghu State. His eyes stared deeply at the mountain range ahead and he whispered, My name is Li Honghe. 19 years ago, my son was sacrificed in this mountain range in front of us. It was a sacrifice. When he said these two words, the old man's tone was particularly clear, with a kind of stubbornness. Li Honghe? The first lieutenant was stunned. He held the gun and muttered to himself subconsciously, It sounds a little familiar. Li Honghe smiled, grasped the flagpole in his hand, and said calmly, More than 20 years ago, the Border Praetorian Corps was established at my suggestion. He ignored the dull soldiers and took a step forward. His figure had appeared directly at the foot of the mountain. He finally slowed down, but his momentum was rising. Cheng Huaining stared at the old man in front of him, his body trembling uncontrollably. He had never thought that he would actually see His Highness, who lived in seclusion at the border of the southern cloud, in such a scene today. He entered the Invincible Realm at the age of 38, killed 6 superiors of the Invincible Realm in his life, ranked first on the divine list for 10 years, fought hundreds of battles in his life, and never tasted defeat. He guarded Jianghu State, suppressed North America, dominated the African continent, looked down on the heroes of South America, and suppressed an era. That was the most glorious first half of his life. His radiance was boundless, and he was invincible. He was Li Honghe. He was the former god of war of Jianghu State. They were the veterans of Jianghu State today. It was the belief of everyone in this era. Cheng Huaining was in a trance. Vaguely, he seemed to have returned to more than 20 years ago, to the time when he had just joined the Border Praetorian Corps. At that time, he was standing beside another highness, and he was personally awarded the rank of lieutenant colonel by this highness. At that time, the face in front of him was not old, and every move he made was filled with vigor and domineering fierceness. At that time, he personally wore the insignia on his shoulder. He said with a smile, Young men are good. Do a good job and protect the country. That was the most glorious era of the Li family. That was the era when the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family joined forces, and the whole dark world was under their feet. When that era passed, when the light of the Li family dissipated, time rumbled silently and passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, nearly 20 years had passed. The former god of war of Jianghu state was no longer there. Now, what appeared in front of him was a white-haired veteran of Jianghu state. Grievance, helplessness, desolation, he fell from the peak to the dust, and from the god of war to a veteran. This old man had dedicated everything to Jianghu state. No matter what he had experienced, he had been silent from beginning to end, with no regrets. But the former god of war was no longer there. There was only a veteran holding a national flag. In his sight, Li Honghe was still walking slowly, from the foot of the mountain to the top. But Cheng Huining did not know why his face was already full of tears. For the flag that had been worn out in 20 years of wind and frost. For the veteran in front of him. At this moment, Cheng Huining was no longer the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, nor was he a lieutenant general of Jianghu state. In front of this veteran who risked everything for Jianghu state, he was just a veteran. A veteran who joined the Border Control Corps in the first batch and had always existed and been fighting. The mountain wind was blowing, and the top of the mountain was silent. An agitated and crazed voice with a sobbing tone resounded on the peak of the mountain, as if it had exhausted all of its strength. Cheng Huining, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Bai Zhijing, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Lu Chuanhai, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Fu Guoqiang, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. On the top and the bottom of the mountain, one figure after another knelt on one knee on the way Li Honghe walked. They used all their strength and roared hoarsely. It was a kind of fanatical roar, close to faith. This was the oldest group of people in the 2nd Division. None of them had a military rank lower than lieutenant colonel. Everyone's military rank was higher than the current Li Honghe. But now, they were just veterans. The flagpole in Li Honghe's hand shook slightly, and then froze again. Get up. Li Honghe walked slowly to the top of the mountain and said softly in a gentle tone, "You're good." Everyone's faces were flushed with excitement, and they roared with all their might, "We're willing to follow your highness to kill the enemy." No need. Li Honghe didn't look back. He passed by Cheng Huining and Bai Zhijing, stood at the forefront of the top of the mountain, and said softly, "Hurry up to build a line of defense. I'll block them, but my time is limited. You have to hurry up." "Your Highness," Cheng Huining's voice trembled slightly, and Bai Zhijing's expression suddenly changed. "You go and help, too." Li Honghe chuckled and said in an unquestionable tone, "Hurry up. I don't have much time." Cheng Huining still wanted to say something, but Bai Zhijing beside him had already tugged at his sleeve and shook his head slightly. Li Honghe didn't look back and walked slowly down the hill alone. Dust rose from the wasteland in front of them. A large black mass of people rushed forward at full speed, like a black tide, surging forward majestically. The enemy had no flag and didn't wear military uniforms. Li Honghe couldn't tell who they were, and he didn't bother to identify them. No dark force could mobilize so many people on the border of Jianghu state. Most of them, no matter what their current identity was, were just a disguise. They had only one real identity. Li Honghe smiled and thrust the flagpole in his hand into the ground. The scarlet flag, which was more than 10 meters long, suddenly flew in the wind. At this moment, the mountain range behind Li Honghe and everything of the 2nd Division seemed to have completely disappeared. In everyone's sight, there was only the man and the flag that could almost hold up the sky. The wind instantly became piercingly cold. Li Honghe stood quietly under the flag. Behind him was the entrance of the mountain range, which was less than 300 meters away. He stood in the middle, and his seemingly weak body seemed to block the entire Jianghu state. The black tide ahead was getting closer and closer. Li Honghe's expression grew gentler. He was born in the best era. From childhood to old age, in this life, he carried not only the glory of the Li family, but also the pride of the Li family. The god of war of Jianghu state fought for the country. The obsession of the Li family was concentrated on him, and maybe it would disappear from him. Li Guangtu was an ambitious man of his generation. He might be willing to sacrifice everything for the Li family, but his character was destined not to be a soldier who would do anything to defend his family and country. He had ambition and desire. When he established the Border Control Corps, Li Honghe hoped that he could find his mission and responsibility in this pure atmosphere of iron and blood. But in the end, he didn't really commit treason, but he died. Li Tianlan's future was still uncertain. And his childhood experience also doomed him to be as loyal and stubborn as Li Honghe to guard the country. In the end, it seemed that Li Honghe was the purest of the three generations. Whether he was the god of war or a veteran, what he did was to protect the country. He had a clear conscience. Impartial, never annoyed. I've been indecisive all my life. If I can die here in battle, it's my end. In the wind, Li Honghe whispered to himself, and his wise eyes were full of freedom. The black tide in front of them surged forward in a frenzy, as if it could topple mountains and overturn seas. It was unstoppable. Li Honghe's slightly stooped body suddenly straightened up and reached out to grab the flying flag. It swept across. The flag streaked across the cold wind and exploded in the wilderness like a thunderclap. The world trembled. A sword energy nearly 100 feet long rose to the sky in an instant. The boundless sword light rushed into the black tide formed by the crowd in front of them with an incomparably heroic momentum. The sky was about to collapse under the sword light. The vast sword light tore the sky apart, bringing with it a large amount of blood rain that rained down unscrupulously. The endless black tide rushed forward, stepping on the bodies of their companions, and the sound of killing shook the sky. Li Honghe waved the star flag in his hand wildly. One after another, the sword light as long as 100 feet rushed into the crowd, bursting out blood all over the sky. The wilderness was stained with blood. The flag was stained with blood. The sword light surged like a waterfall. The flag danced like a dragon. Fight to the death. Chapter 227. The light at the edge of the sky slowly closed in the sultry temperature. The long night was coming, and the sky at the end of the sight was oppressive black. In the alternating time of day and night, there was no dim setting sun in the distant sky of Huading, only gloomy dark clouds. The dark clouds were getting lower and lower. Standing on the high ground of the Sky Academy and looking up, the dark clouds all over the sky seemed to be within reach. If you stared deeply, you could even vaguely see the blue lightning brewing inside the dark clouds. In the classroom on the top floor of the number 3 teaching building of the Sky Academy, Zhuang Huayang looked through the window at the lower and lower dark clouds above. With a complicated expression, he sighed softly with some worry. It's going to rain tonight. It's normal for the weather to change. Headmaster Zhuang is also a person who has experienced storms and we have prepared umbrellas. Why should you worry? Yi Dongsheng, who was known as the god of army in Jianghu state, slowly came to Zhuang Huayang and said with a kind smile. The god of army of Jianghu state, who was born in the southeast group but was now highly relied on by all parties, looked a little ordinary. But at this time, dressed in a military uniform, his every move carried an indescribable spirit. It was not the arrogance and fierceness of a warrior, but the deep and elegant wisdom and calmness. It was simple, but it gave people a feeling that everything was under control. I'm getting old, and the older I get, the more timid I become. Zhuang Huayang laughed at himself, turned to look at Yi Dongsheng, and said with a smile, I'm not as confident as Marshal Yi. It's windy and rainy tonight, and our umbrellas are still a little small. I'm afraid that they will break. Yi Dongsheng smiled and squinted at the figure standing in front of another window. He said with a smile, Old Gu, did you hear that? The headmaster thinks your umbrella is not big enough. If you can't protect the Sky Academy tonight, the headmaster will get angry. Don't blame me for not reminding you. There's no other way. Gu Xingyun, who was also looking out of the window with a solemn face, said lightly, all the elites of Kunlun City have come out. Tonight, we will do our best and die without regret. If someone didn't want to preserve his strength, what's the big deal even if the wind and rain were 10 times stronger tonight? Yi Dongxing's expression did not change, and he said softly, "Your Highness, you're too serious. Now everyone is going all out. How can there be any preservation of strength?" Gu Xingyan's elegant and almost gentle face showed a sneer. He did not look back but asked sharply, "Go all out? The Wang family of Beihai?" The smile on Yi Dongxing's face gradually became faint, and even his tone became rigid, like an official statement without substance. His Majesty's Sword Emperor has gone to the southwest border with the human emperor. With only one person and one spear, the Wang family of Beihai's contribution is no less than that of Kunlun City. Besides, Beihai province was vast and close to East Island. How could His Majesty show any flaws? The few elites were naturally left to guard the North Sea province. This was the tacit agreement of all the higher-ups. What could His Highness's sarcasm change? Are you afraid? Scared? Gu Xingyan suddenly turned his head and looked at Yi Dongxing. His tone was very soft, but his eyes were extremely cold. "You too, we've gone off topic." Zhuang Huayang stood aside with a smile and pointed out of the window. A strange light flashed in his deep eyes, and he sighed softly, "The storm is coming." A muffled thunder suddenly rolled across the sky. The pale blue lightning tore through the night. The glass trembled in the thunder, and heavy rain swept across Huading without warning. Gu Xingyan and Yi Dongxing did not say anything more. They turned around at the same time and looked at a screen in the room with a serious look. They were now in the largest classroom in the number 3 teaching building, with an area of nearly 2,000 square meters. One of the 100-meter wide walls was made into a super-large screen. At this time, the screen was lit up, and the scene looked extremely shocking. There were hundreds of computers arranged vertically in the classroom. As the rain fell, there were at least 2 military elites working busily in front of each computer. The clattering of the keyboard and the sound of the rain merged together, and the images on the big screen were constantly changing as the military elites worked busily. Gu Xingyan, Yi Dongxing, and Zhuang Huayang all stared at the screen intently. However, the big screen had been divided into countless windows at this time, and the pictures on each window were turning like running water. Even if the 3 had amazing eyesight, their eyes still instinctively felt uncomfortable after watching for a while. On the whole big screen, the real-time pictures of every corner of Huading were jumping. Every street, every intersection, and every highway were changing constantly. The speed was so fast that it was dazzling. The big classroom was quiet for a while. The 3 stared at the screen in front of them tightly, for fear of missing any detail. The 5th day and night. This was the key of the key. At this time, Huading, from the urban area to the Sky Academy, had become one of the most heavily guarded places in the whole Jianghu state. The Sky Academy, in particular, was a combustible and explosive powder keg. The experts of the 5 forces who had come to the Sky Academy to watch the ceremony were all trapped here. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, Luxing Xianxia, the master of Jifeng Sword Training School, Jiang Qinyan, the second in command of the Jiang family of South America, Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, Huan Kong, the master of Fantasy World. There were 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, not to mention the experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm they brought. The Sky Academy had not been idle during this time. These people had special identities and were extremely honorable. Naturally, they could not be killed. Not to mention whether it would lose the demeanor of a superpower, even if Jianghu state did not care about it, it would be difficult for it to bear the consequences of killing them. They came to Jianghu state just to watch the ceremony. If they really died in Huading, perhaps the special warfare system of Jianghu state would be unable to move within their sphere of influence in the future. After all the dark forces had intricate inside stories behind them. It was not kind to trap them. If they were really killed when they came to watch the ceremony, Jianghu state would have made countless enemies at once. However, although they could not be killed, Zhuang Huayang did not make them feel better. He invited Yu Donglai, one of the former sacred guards of the Li family, to the Sky Academy, and almost every day he tampered with their meals. Yu Donglai was known as the Poison Doctor and was famous throughout the dark world. When it came to using poison, he was definitely regarded as a guru. However, it was really difficult to poison 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and dozens of experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm without being noticed. Even Yu Donglai tried his best to prepare the poison and carefully controlled the dosage. The poison concocted by Yu Donglai did little harm to the body and would only reduce their physical strength. But the most important toxicity was to erode the spirit. The spirit determined the will, and the will was as important as the strength in martial arts. If the will was not focused enough, the strength could not be exerted, and the combat capability was destined to be greatly reduced. This kind of poison was the most difficult to be noticed, but the shortcoming was that it took effect slowly. For many days, those prisoners with special identities had been eating this kind of poison every meal, but the effect was not great. The combat capability of the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and those experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm might decline, but not by much. At least the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, even if they were not at their peak, their combat capability was definitely above the half-step Invincible Realm. This was already the maximum toxicity that the poison concocted by Yu Donglai could exert. Now Wang Tianzong had gone to the border of Jianghu state, and the master of Samsara Palace was said to have left the Sky Academy to heal her wounds in secret. Gu Xingyun was the only expert of the Invincible Realm in the entire Sky Academy. In the case that the defense of the Sky Academy was empty, even if the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm were not at their peak, they were still 5 horrible monsters for Jianghu state. If they took advantage of the chaos to break out, it would be a disaster for the entire Huading. They might not know the situation inside the Sky Academy, but at this time, Huading was also turbulent with undercurrents. After all, as Tianhai Wuji and Luxia Xianxia entered Jianghu state, a considerable part of the special warfare elites of East Island also lurked in Huading. During this time, Kunlun City issued a search warrant, and the entire special warfare system searched in Huading. Although many people were found, some escaped fish were still hiding in the dark. They were all in Huading, facing an excellent opportunity. If the 2 sides wanted to get in touch, even in the Sky Academy, they could still find a way. Now it was the 5th day and night of the 7-day period. The 5 dark forces seemed to have secretly reached a tacit understanding with East Island. During this delicate period, the 5 forces joined forces with Annan state to invade the border of Jianghu state. As soon as Wang Tianzong left, the Sky Academy and Huading suddenly lost a big deterrent force. If the hostile forces trapped in Huading and the Sky Academy could really break out tonight, they could still reach Changdao at this time. At that time, the final battle of Changdao might be at the last moment, and these experts who broke out were enough to change the result of the final battle of Changdao. Jianghu state was aware of the changes at the border, but it never thought that the changes at the border were actually caused by the 5 dark forces. This had never happened in the past decades, and the 5 forces could let go of their grievances and come together, which was enough to show their great determination and ambition. In the battle of the border, even figures of the Invincible Realm on the divine list would appear. Wang Tianzong, who was originally in charge of Huading, could only rush to the southwest border to save the situation. As soon as he moved, Huading suddenly became empty. For a few days, the elites of Azura Path, Great Soaring Temple, Shadow Sect, Kunlun City, and other institutions could only rush to Huading to replenish the strength of Huading. And this group of people, in the plan, was originally the 3rd group of elites who rushed to East Island. Now they were used to defend Huading, and East Island suddenly became a little weak. After all, this situation was too big and there were too many variables. It could be said that one move in one part could affect the whole situation. Jianghu state, which had a very obvious advantage in the first move, suddenly became weak as the 5 forces invaded the border. The original advantage was not only wiped out, but if they couldn't defend Huading tonight, when this group of hostile experts arrived at East Island, the whole situation would be completely reversed and become precarious. Once the worst happened, not to mention East Island, Jianghu state was bound to suffer a great loss of vitality. Not to mention expanding outward, even defending the homeland would be a problem. At that time, the superpowers would take the opportunity to invade Jianghu state, and maybe the Battle of Changdao would happen again in Jianghu state. If things were really like this, then as the main promoter of the plot of East Island, Gu Xingyun would definitely be blamed, and the good situation would also be in vain. This might be the result that some people wanted to see, right? Staring at the screen in front of him, Gu Xingyun looked calm and elegant, but his eyes were full of coldness. This situation was not irreversible, but there was not much he could do. The Wang family of Beihai had become the key to breaking the situation. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the southeast group of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, which had the vague power of a country in Zhongzhou State, had been glorious for more than 500 years. Its deep foundation was enough to make everyone's scalp numb. Wang Tianzong went to the southwest border with the human emperor in his hand. Firmament, the enchantress, Black Pupil, and Wang Xingxiao entered East Island. The Wang family of Beihai had invested a lot, but this was far from all their strength. If the strength of the Wang family of Beihai could be invested in a large number, how could Zhongzhou State be so embarrassed? In recent days, more than one high-level official of Zhongzhou State asked Wang Tianzong to invest more combat power in Zhongzhou State, but the Wang family of Beihai was very firm. They clearly said that they would reserve their strength to guard Beihai province in a sensitive situation, and they did invest a lot. Even if everyone knew that the Wang family of Beihai was saving their strength, they had nothing to say. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. The general trend was turbulent, and the situation was changing. Who could be selfless? Even Gu Xingyun himself, as the war god of Zhongzhou State, thought that he could not do it wholeheartedly for Zhongzhou State. How could he ask Beihai province, which had a very delicate relationship with Zhongzhou State? Perhaps the Li family was the only one who could do this, right? Unfortunately, Kunlun City and the Li family were destined not to coexist in Zhongzhou State. A glaring blue lightning flashed on the big screen that was rotating rapidly. The lightning rushed up to the sky and exploded the surging river. Gu Xingyun's pupils shrank suddenly, and he subconsciously shouted in a low voice, "Window 27, replay." There was no need to replay it at all. A deep and crazy voice directly resounded through the night sky of the Sky Academy through the heavy rain. "Gu Xingyun, come out and fight." The loud voice shook the night sky, and the scene played back by Window 27 was the gate of the Sky Academy. A figure stood in the air above the river, and there was glaring lightning all over his body. He was not asking for a fight. It was an obvious signal. At the same time, on the continuously rolling screen, countless windows were in chaos almost at the same time. Many streets in Huading were attacked by unknown masters at the same time. Lightning and fire bloomed at every intersection. With violent explosions, cars and pedestrians were all crowded together, and the traffic of the whole city suddenly became chaotic. East Island elites hiding in downtown Huading began to break out in the rainy night. Zhuang Huayang quietly looked at the screen in front of him and said blandly, "The rain is heavy. In one night, I don't know how many small fish and shrimps can swim back to Changdao with this rain. When they get back to Changdao, they will really become big fish." At this moment, maybe only Zhongzhou State's god of army Yi Dongxing could laugh. He chuckled and shook his head, saying slowly, "Headmaster, Huading is not far from Changdao, only separated by a sea area. It should be raining in Changdao now. The rain in Huading can't drown them, but not necessarily in Changdao." Zhuang Huayang was stunned for a moment. Gu Xingyun had already turned around. He stared at Yi Dongxing's bland face for a long time, and then said coldly, "You have a good plan." Yi Dongxing smiled blandly and didn't say much. But Gu Xingyun could already be sure that in such an ever-changing situation, the Wang family of Beihai suppressed its main force and didn't support Huading or the border. They weren't guarding Beihai province at all. This was a big gamble. The main force of the Wang family of Beihai might have already secretly entered Changdao. In a dangerous situation, he went deep into the enemy's rear with such courage. He could be called an ambitious man of his generation. If the Wang family of Beihai won the final battle in Changdao, even if Huading suffered heavy losses, even if the border failed, it was still a victory for Zhongzhou State. A Pyrrhic victory was also a victory. But Gu Xingyun had to bear the consequences of Huading's failure alone. What a good plan. The killing intent flashed in Gu Xingyun's eyes. In this battle, the 5 invincible realm experts weren't in their peak state. And he was seriously injured on the spot after the battle with the governor of Samsara. Although he consumed a bottle of precious potion that could be regarded as the foundation in Kunlun City and recovered more than half of his strength, he was still not in his peak state. This night, under this night rain, he was destined to be extremely difficult. Gu Xingyun. Come out and fight. In front of the Sky Academy, the seemingly reckless challenge rang out again, and the sound was like thunder. Boom. Before Gu Xingyun moved, a 6-story residential building in the residential area of the Sky Academy had been instantly shattered by a huge force. The 5 invincible realm experts trapped in the Sky Academy slowly moved forward in the ruins. Chapter 228. A bloody battle. For every soldier of the Thunderbolt Battalion, when their marshal, Dongqing Wudi, personally beat the war drum of the family and country, there was no way out of this war. Advance. Or die. The sound of killing at the border of Nanyan shook the sky. From dawn to dusk, blood was spilled over every inch of land on the border. Decisive roars and gunshots roared wantonly, bullets flew, and light beams shuttled back and forth. Large crowds crowded together, trying to kill the enemy by any means necessary. The thick ice wall was broken in the moment it was condensed. Fire and lightning intertwined, rising and burning but quickly extinguished. Corpses fell to the ground in disorder. The pungent smell of blood was everywhere inside and outside the forest. The blood evaporated and dried up in the fire. The bloody battle lasted for more than 10 hours. When the sun was about to set, the whole sky became a strange blood-red color. Under the blood-red sky, large patches of light and shadow were still intertwining and flashing. The sound of the war drum of the family and country never stopped, but became louder and louder. More and more people fell in pools of blood and were trampled into meat paste before they could even struggle. The people on both sides collided with each other in the rain of bullets with red eyes. The war seemed to never stop. From a distance, in the flashing light and shadow, the vast battlefield was like a Shura purgatory with a gorgeous coat. Under the gorgeous light and shadow, in addition to the blood and corpses, there was only madness and resentment. Night gradually fell on the border. The hoarse roars of thousands of people continued. The morale of the Border Control Corps soared, and they kept charging forward with reckless momentum. It was a madness that was enough to make anyone's scalp numb. They were so aggressive and radical that they ignored life and death. Boom! 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 A strong roar sounded in the depths of the forest in the distance. More than a dozen brilliant streams of light cut through the dark night in an instant. The cannonballs dragged a fiery red tail flame over the crowd of the Border Control Corps and landed in the rear of the enemy. In the angry roar, ice walls appeared one after another in the blink of an eye behind the enemy. The airflow in front of the ice walls was compressed to the extreme. At the same time, at least 10 thunder-shocking realm experts took action at the same time to stop the shells falling from the sky. The cannonballs that were fired at the same time struck the ice wall with a ferocious light of death. The earth-shattering sound covered the entire battlefield, and the tall and thick ice wall was completely torn apart. Huge chunks of ice flew everywhere, and the densely packed crowd instantly exploded into waves of blood. Broken limbs flew into the sky along with the flames, and suddenly, a large, dazzling blank space appeared behind the enemy. There were some uncontrolled disturbances at the forefront of the enemy. How could the soldiers of the Border Control Corps let go of this hard-won opportunity? They roared and charged forward, and the 1,000-meter-long battlefront was forced back several hundred meters. Boom! Boom! In the rear of the Border Control Corps, crazy artillery fire began to pour unscrupulously. Although the enemy occasionally fought back, their firepower was much worse than that of the Border Control Corps. The battle line, which was like a meat grinder, was forced to keep retreating. In the war that lasted more than 10 hours, the front line kept retreating and was about to withdraw from the territory of Jianghu State. Less than 300 meters behind them was the territory of Annan State. Cannonballs roared down from the sky one after another, and patches of the enemy were swallowed up by the strong explosions. There were more and more blank spaces in the rear of the enemy. In the headquarters at the rear of the enemy, a short commander's face became more and more unsightly. When the armed helicopters of the Border Control Corps slowly took off, the commander, who had been brewing his anger for a long time, could no longer hold it in and completely exploded. His short body jumped up from the ground and he shouted in English without any grace, "Bastards, all of you are bastards. When are you going to take action? Are you going to wait for all my people to die? My people have been fighting for more than 10 hours, and all the weapons and ammunition are running out. If you still don't take action, I will ask my people to withdraw." The commander's skin was dark and he was short, but his roar was full of energy, making everyone's ears buzz. He was not in a room, but on the top of a mountain behind the enemy. Within a radius of several kilometers, this could be said to be the highest place. Standing on the top of the mountain and looking down, with the help of binoculars, they could roughly see the situation of the battlefield even through the dense forest. "Don't get excited, Mr. Wan. You must know that this is a great war. Our losses may be heavy, but the results are equally brilliant. Because in this war, we can not only destroy the Blood Battalion, but also half of the Thunderbolt Battalion. You know what this means." In front of the commander, a middle-aged white man in his 50s smiled and said softly, "This is not your loss, this is my loss. All of it is mine." The short commander said coldly, "You have lost a lot, but you have also destroyed enough enemies." A white woman glanced at the commander and said coldly, "There were not many people on the top of the mountain. To be exact, there were only 6 people. The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Knights Templars, the Jianghu family of South America, and Fantasy World. Each of the 5 superpowers had 1 person, but at this time they were united. The 6th person was the short commander. 5 against 1. The commander did not have the advantage in terms of number or strength. But in the thick night, he was not afraid at all. He just sneered and said, "So what? Even if we destroy the entire Border Control Corps, what can we get?" "Sorry." A soft voice sounded. Among the 5 superpowers, the man representing the Jianghu family of South America laughed softly and said, "Mr. Wan, you can't get anything, because you and your troops are rebels." The commander's momentum suddenly stagnated, and then his whole body suddenly burst out with a fierce killing intent. In front of him, the representatives of the 5 superpowers almost took a step at the same time, intentionally or unintentionally, and stood together, looking at the commander in front of them coldly. Even if the rebels can't get anything, they shouldn't come to die. The commander looked at the 5 experts in front of him and said in a cold tone, "My troops have suffered heavy casualties and run out of ammunition. Now, I think it's time for you to take action. You have the right to refuse, but I also have the right to withdraw from this war. Everyone, I give you 5 minutes. You know what to do." "I don't think it's time yet." The white man who spoke first shook his head and said, "This is not in line with our plan, Mr. Wan. You must cooperate with us, or I will report your behavior to your president." As you wish." The commander interrupted him with a sneer and said indifferently, "We are rebels. Do we need to care about other things?" He took out the walkie-talkie in his hand and looked provocatively at the 5 experts in front of him. He said mockingly, "You only have 3 minutes to think about it. I'll give you 2 choices. First, let your people press forward and fight with my troops. Second, kill me now, if you think you can take over my command. We're all friends. There's no need to go this far, is there?" The middle-aged man from the Jianghu family of South America said with a smile. He picked up the binoculars and looked seriously at the battlefield below. After a long time, he said softly, "Everyone, it's almost time. Mr. Wan is right. It's time for us to take action. Why don't we send our little butterflies to play with them first?" The other 4 people were slightly stunned. They were silent. Boom! A huge sound wave rang out from the back of the battlefield. Behind the Border Control Corps, there was a sudden burst of fire. Countless cannonballs rose in the air with trailing flames, like meteors, rushing into the enemy's rear one after another. The sky was illuminated by the fire. In the fierce explosion, the entire border was shaking wildly. It was like the end of the world. Chapter 229. As the absolute soul of the Border Control Corps, Dongxing Wudi had been at the forefront of the Thunderbolt Battalion from beginning to end, facing the densest and most ferocious fangs of the enemy. The bloody battle went from morning to noon and into the night. Dongxing Wudi had long forgotten how many people he had killed. He took bottles of military stimulants that could maintain his physical strength. The absolute power turned into sword light all over the sky. The sword rain was torrential, and the wind and thunder were roaring. He had been standing at the forefront of the battle line, facing the splashing rain of blood and never retreating. Everyone in the Thunderbolt Battalion was following his footsteps. The elite army of more than 10,000 people seemed to be completely integrated with him. As long as he was still standing at the forefront, the people in the rear would not retreat even if they died. Advance. Advance like crazy. In more than 10 hours, Dongxing Wudi took the lead and directly pushed forward the battle line by nearly 6 kilometers, and the distance was still expanding. The number of the enemy was actually far more than the 10,000 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion. The enemy's number was even close to 40,000 people. The disadvantage of the Border Control Corps was the number, while the disadvantage of the enemy was firepower, combat capability, and morale. The firepower was barely bearable, but the combat capability and morale could not be made up. As the most elite large army of Jianghu state, the combat capability of the Border Control Corps was second to none in the world. The Thunderbolt Battalion was the trump card of the Border Control Corps. In this battle, they were backed by the Blood Battalion, and the rear was supported by a lot of firepower from the Blood Battalion. At the forefront, their marshal was fighting the enemy bravely. In the battlefield of artillery fire, the Thunderbolt Battalion might be tired, but as long as Dongxing Wudi was still at the front, their morale would not weaken. The four gods of Jianghu state. In terms of combat capability, Dongxing Wudi was far inferior to Gu Xingyun, who was known as the god of war. In terms of strategy, he seemed to be inferior to Yi Dongsheng, the god of army. In terms of mystery, he could not compare with Situ Tsanyue, the hidden god. But Dongxing Wudi's killing intent and bravery could always burst out incisively and vividly at the most critical moment. He took the lead and would not retreat until he died. With him around, the entire Border Control Corps could erupt with an incredible fierceness and madness. He was the god of massacre of Jianghu state and also the soul of the Border Control Corps. There were nearly 3 million troops in Jianghu state, 5 theater of operations, an independent theater of operations, a border control corps, and special forces of all sizes. In the past 100 years, no one had been as prestigious as Dongxing Wudi in his army. Just like before the Thunderbolt Legion marched in, Dongxing Wudi was saluting Jianghu state. But the Border Control Corps was saluting the marshal. Kill! In the blood-spattered night, Dongxing Wudi roared. His voice had long been hoarse, but it was indescribably majestic and heroic in the night. The artillery roared behind him and exploded into the enemy's rear. Dazzling shadows danced on the front line, and the intense gunshots became sparser and sparser. Only sword lights continued to flash on the battlefield. Dongxing Wudi had wounds all over his body. Blood gushed out of his body, and some parts of his body had become numb. He took out the last bottle of military stimulant and poured it into his mouth. He waved the long sword in his hand, and his eyes became more and more fierce and frenzied. In his sight, countless enemies rushed up again, roaring and attacking him. These people could be regarded as elites, but most of them had not entered the 4 realms of martial arts. Not to mention the ice-condensing realm and fire-flaming realm, even the chi-controlling realm was pitifully small. Black clothes, no badges, no military flags, and no origin. Dongxing Wudi had seen several familiar figures in the crowd. They were the targets of Annan State that the Border Control Corps focused on. But now Scorpion in Annan State rebelled, and the Northern Army went south to quell the rebellion. Everything made sense. At least on the surface, these black-clothed enemies, who suddenly appeared, had no position and were only related to the 5 dark forces in the dark world. Dongxing Wudi didn't want to know who these people were. In his eyes, these people existed for only one purpose. That was to be cannon fodder to consume his own combat effectiveness. After more than 10 hours of fierce fighting, the elite experts of the 5 dark forces still hadn't appeared. When their physical strength was about to be exhausted and their ammunition was completely exhausted, the real battle had just begun. Dongxing Wudi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes became more and more upright. Boom, 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 there was a sudden roar in the blood-red night sky. The huge sound came from an unknown place in the sky, but it was so clear on the ground, like thunder and an explosion. In the flying sword light, Dongxing Wudi suddenly looked up at the night sky. General, that is, Shi Hanbing, who had been rushing behind Dongxing Wudi, asked breathlessly. His face was pale, and his body was shaking, as if he would fall down at any time. Enemy. Dongxing Wudi whispered, the real enemy. Boom. An unprecedented loud noise suddenly sounded in the sky beyond everyone's sight, and the blood-red night sky suddenly lit up in the highest place. The loud noise spread in the air, and the instantaneous light suddenly illuminated a large area of the blood-red night sky. The raging fire in the air seemed to burn up the sky. In the loud noise, messy sounds rang out one after another. The first fire had not been extinguished, but groups of fire had begun to bloom in the air. The sky within a radius of more than 10 kilometers was almost completely covered by the fire. The night sky was covered by the fire. Little by little, the fire became more and more erratic in the air, rising or falling, and finally fell to the ground in a struggle. It was a large number of fireballs, scattered and scattered, smashing to the battlefield below, like meteors. The battle on the whole battlefield seemed to be affected by the sudden change and gradually eased. The fireballs in the sky kept approaching the ground, and huge pieces of burning metal rubbed against the air and fell down. For a moment, there was no distinction between the enemy and the enemy. The fireballs fell everywhere, and the whole forest began to burn in the flames. Wreckage. That's the butterfly team. The butterfly team of the Heroes Club. Shi Hanbing suddenly reacted. He took a deep breath, and his expression was complicated. Damn it, these bastards are really willing to pay a heavy price. Wang Wandian cursed out loud. His entire face had changed. What kept falling from the sky was not weapons at all, but the wreckage of a large number of fighter planes. The battle in the sky was only for a moment, but at least 7 or 8 fighter planes fell. Some of them belonged to Jianghu State, but the others were the famous Butterfly Fighter. Butterfly Fighter. One of the air forces of the Heroes Club. The specific number was unknown to the outside world, but there would be no more than 3 formations at most. The battle in the air was still going on. Judging from the scale, this time the Heroes Club had put in at least 1 formation of Butterfly Fighter, which was totally a heavy price. As soon as the real enemy appeared, they sent out Butterfly Fighter. What else would come later? The huge fireballs in the air were still falling. A section of a black wing burning with flames fell to the ground, and the raging fire instantly engulfed the forest for tens of meters. The corner of Dongxing Wudi's mouth twitched, and he said coldly, "Eagle Fighter." The Eagle Fighter of the Jianghu family of South America was not much less famous than the Butterfly Fighter in the Dark World. This kind of super force in the Dark World had always pursued the principle of quality over quantity. Whether it was Eagle Fighter or Butterfly Fighter, their advanced level could be said to be the best, which was also one of their strongest trump cards. If the Butterfly Fighter sent out a formation, the number of Eagle Fighter could not be much less. Since the 2 teams had put in a lot of money, the other 3 teams could not stand by and do nothing. Now in the air, there were probably 5 formations of the best. 100 fighter planes with the best performance. It's really a big deal. But 2 intimidating teams came to the border of Jianghu State to behave atrociously. Damn it, do they think that Jianghu State has no air force? Or do they think that our border control corps has no air force? Do they want to succeed with just these two formations? Wang Wandian grinned, suddenly picked up the walkie-talkie at his waist, and roared, "Give the order." "Don't worry." Dongsheng Wudi suddenly spoke. His expression became a little strange for a moment, and then he said slowly, "Wantian, give the order. Let our fighter planes lower their altitude, slowly deal with them, save our strength, and wait for an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Wang Wandian and Shi Hanbing asked at the same time. "Some strength can be saved, so don't waste it." Dongsheng Wudi's expression was complicated. It was a kind of relaxed but extremely angry emotion. Since they want to use the team as bait, then let's fulfill their wish. He took a deep breath and suddenly raised the long sword in his hand. "Come with me, let's slaughter this group of bastards." In the high sky, the violent sound, as if the sky and the earth were collapsing, kept surging. In the sky and on the ground, there were fights everywhere. Fighter planes fell one after another, and the fierce fire kept spreading in the crowd. In the burning sky, as the Zhongzhou fighter planes lowered their altitude, the fighter planes of the 5 teams also vaguely appeared under the curtain of night. The light spots flying at high speed became more and more obvious. One advanced and one retreated. The Zhongzhou fighter planes that took off in a hurry were almost at an absolute disadvantage in number. As the losses increased, the flying formation of Zhongzhou State began to retreat continuously. Above the sky, the sound of exploding shells and the harsh whistling of the fighter planes flying across the sky were everywhere. In the night sky, the dense light spots were getting denser and denser, and the retreat and pursuit were getting more and more intense. At a certain moment, the formation of the enemy fighter planes directly gathered together, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally. Countless shells were dropped directly. The violent explosions kept ringing in the camp of the Border Control Corps, and it was deafening. Countless elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion fell in the fire of the explosion. Wang Wantian's eyes were red, like a crazy demon. He opened his mouth and roared with all his strength. But the loud sound rushed out of his mouth, but there was no sound. All the sounds were completely suppressed at the moment of the explosion. In an instant, there was only a clear and majestic sound left between heaven and earth. The clear sound was so short and single, but with the momentum of tearing the 9th heaven, it clearly resounded in everyone's ears. The sound of the explosion disappeared, the roar disappeared, and the screams disappeared. Only that clear cry reverberated in the night, lingering in the ears. In the quiet mountain forest, a white light curtain rushed directly to the sky with the clear sound. It was silent like flowing light. It was full of majesty like a god. The thick night. The blood-red sky. In an instant, it was as bright as day. The blazing white light enveloped the whole world. For a moment, there was only a vast and dazzling white left in everyone's sight. The white light was spreading and disappearing. It was like a moment, but also like an eternity. When the white light dissipated, dozens of fighter planes had disappeared in the air without a sound, not even leaving the slightest wreckage. Under the sky, there was only one figure standing at the highest point of the void. A big black spear was held tightly in his hand, pointing to the sky. One man and one spear, in an instant, became the center of the whole world. Everyone was silent, staring blankly at the sky above. That was the most legendary invincible realm expert in the Dark World. It was the world-shaking murderous weapon that left too many legends in the Border Control Corps. After a short silence, the entire Thunderbolt Battalion burst into cheers that went straight to the sky in an instant. The cheers were so fanatical and violent that the huge sound waves kept shaking the entire border. All the cheers turned into 2 words, echoing endlessly in the night sky, like a song that had been sung throughout the ages. Human Emperor. Chapter 230. The attack of the human emperor could be said to have changed the color of heaven and earth, turning the night into the day. The surging blazing white light hit the night sky tens of thousands of meters away. Anything tangible was turned into dust under the cover of the white light. More than half of the air forces of the 5 forces that had gathered together disappeared. This kind of power could completely destroy the world. This was the real world-destroying blow. As the number one person in the Dark World, even if Wang Tianzong could not exert the power of the ultimate form of the human emperor, the destructive power of his attack was also the peak of the combination of a person and a murderous weapon in the Dark World. The number one expert in the Dark World and the number one murderous weapon in the Dark World. When both of them were at their peak, Wang Tianzong had the spirit to regard all the invincible realm experts in the world as nothing with a spear in his hand. The white light that covered the night had already disappeared. Amidst the earth-shattering cheers, only that clear cry seemed to still be echoing. All the surviving soldiers of the Border Control Corps roared like crazy. They were absolutely loyal to Dongqing Wudi, but they also admired the legend of Jianghu State. For hundreds of years in Jianghu State, every clear sound of the human emperor meant a great victory for Jianghu State in some major event. Every time the Wang family of Beihai and the human emperor joined the battlefield, it also meant that Jianghu State would go all out in this event and fight for every inch of land. Nothing could make Jianghu State compromise. The aftermath of the clear sound of the human emperor had not dissipated. The cheers of the word human emperor had already been heard. The blazing white light dispelled the blood red in the air. It was another clear night over the Nanyuan border. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Wang Tianzong stood in the void, bathed in the moonlight falling from the sky. In the loud cheers, he slowly said, "Who is here? Come out and fight." The voice was calm and indifferent. The low voice instantly suppressed the cheers on the ground and spread in the whole field. It was majestic, calm and confident. The dark human emperor had turned into the form of an arm guard, covering Wang Tianzong's right arm. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm, and he slowly raised the long sword in his hand. The moment the sword energy rose into the sky, behind a large number of enemies, in the void at almost the same height as Wang Tianzong, a touch of darkness like a raging flame suddenly surged up. The dense night couldn't suppress the darkness. Instead, it was dyed even darker by the black flame. The void was twisting and shaking. The black flame spread like ink, dyeing the void and the dark night. A dangerous aura that was filled with ruthlessness and death swept through the world, vast and mighty. It became more and more obvious in the night sky. "It's almost time." An indistinct voice suddenly rang out in the night sky. It was a very low and deep English accent. Every single word was filled with an almost violent fighting spirit. Far from it. Wang Tianzong stared intently at the black flame that was constantly spreading in the void thousands of meters away, and his tone was cold. "The human emperor has moved. The cannon fodder is almost used up. It's time for our counterattack." The voice continued. It was icy cold and silent, and it seemed to have obliterated all emotions that a human should have. Not to mention the army of Jianghu State, even in the enemy camp, anyone who could understand English looked angry. They took off their glory and put on the black clothes they were wearing now. They fought and bathed in blood, but in the end, they got the evaluation of cannon fodder. It was really sad. The black flame was silent, but it was spreading more and more violently. He was telling the truth. On this battlefield, even a half-step invincible realm expert like Dongqing Wudi was a nonentity in his eyes, not to mention ordinary soldiers. Why should he care about the thoughts of nonentities? Wang Tianzong slowly lowered his head. He didn't seem to care about the increasingly fierce black flame in the void at all. He just looked down at the black human emperor that had turned into an arm guard. The black human emperor was now lusterless. But as the black flame in front of it jumped, the black metal surface of the human emperor seemed to have a reaction and kept rippling. Wang Tianzong stroked the arm guard, expressionless. There were few records about murderous weapons in the Dark World. The 13 murderous weapons usually appeared at the most critical moment, so some secrets that were not widely spread. Especially about the origin of the murderous weapons. Only a few people in the Dark World knew that the 13 murderous weapons came from the same source. They came from the same piece of metal, but they were different in size and color. This kind of rare treasure originally came from a superpower overseas. After its decline hundreds of years ago, it was robbed and finally divided into 13 parts. 19 years ago, with the destruction of the Li family's murderous weapon Infinite Sky, the 12 murderous weapons left today were all that was left of that piece of metal. For countless years, all the superpowers and even countries had been searching for this mysterious metal intentionally or unintentionally. But for hundreds of years, there was only one such piece of metal. Since it was divided, no new murderous weapons had appeared. The murderous weapons were made into guns, but they didn't need bullets. The energy they emitted was entirely the energy they absorbed. In short, murderous weapons needed to store energy, which was their biggest weakness. The last time the human emperor made a clear sound was more than a decade ago. The accumulated energy of more than a decade was vented with the firing of the human emperor tonight. As for when it could be used again, whether it would be a month or two, a year or two, it was the top secret of the Wang family of Beihai. But at least in this battle, the human emperor that had already fired couldn't play a role for the time being. However, the human emperor destroyed dozens of fighter jets in one fell swoop with the energy accumulated by the human emperor over the years. Such a result was not a disgrace to the reputation of the human emperor. And the most important thing was that those famous flying teams were obviously the bait left by the 5 superpowers for the human emperor. If the human emperor didn't move, the invincible realm experts hidden in the dark wouldn't come out to court death. No one knew how long this war would last. So Wang Tianzong simply used the human emperor to swallow the bait. Time was limited, so he had to finish the battle quickly. The light in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became sharp. He ranked first on the divine list and should be invincible in the world. Even without the human emperor, he still had a sword. With a sword in hand, he was fearless. Even without the human emperor, you are no match for me. Arsis, do you really think a murderous weapon that hasn't been storing energy for a long time can do anything to me? Wang Tianzong slowly raised his head. Staring at the black flame in the void, his tone became colder and colder. From the first time he saw the black flame, he had already determined who the invincible realm expert who came to the border this time was. He didn't belong to any invincible realm expert from the 5 superpowers, but he was inextricably linked to Knights Templars. To be precise, he was one of the masters of Knights Templars. The second on the world divine list. Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Saint Arsis. I want to have a try. The deep voice, like a murmur, echoed in the sky. In the void, the black flame suddenly rose to the limit. The murderous weapon had been fully activated. The black flame was like a tide, and it suddenly set off a black wave as high as the sky. Wang Tianzong said no more and raised the long sword horizontally. This was a simple and old long sword that didn't look special. But as the blade was unsheathed inch by inch, the long sword suddenly burst out with unparalleled brilliance. This was a famous sword that had been around for less than 200 years. It was a famous sword that was made up of several broken swords from the Wang family of Beihai. The sword energy was shocking. The sword is called Listen to the Sea. There was a surge under Listen to the Sea. Boom! The black flame that dyed the whole sky suddenly vibrated. The moment the black flame wave twisted, in the void ahead, a tall and majestic figure suddenly appeared in the void. A black spear that was more than 1 meter long and shaped like a shotgun was held in his hand. He pointed the muzzle at Wang Tianzong and pulled the trigger without hesitation. There was a sudden explosion in the night sky. It sounded like a scream, but also like a sigh. This was the murderous weapon that had made the Dark Knights suffer heavy losses in Northern Europe 5 years ago. It was also the murderous weapon that helped Knights Templar successfully withstand the great pressure of the Dark Knights. It was also the murderous weapon that belonged to Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Arsis. Chant of Death. The black flame surged, and the starlight and moonlight were completely covered by the black flame. The black light almost enveloped all the space around Wang Tianzong in an instant. The moment Listen to the Sea was about to be unsheathed. On the east and west sides of the battlefield, there was a long roar that shook the night sky almost at the same time. One east and one west. It was an old roar filled with endless battle intent. The other voice was relatively young, full of tiredness and helplessness. The long roar sounded one after another, but the two strong lights arrived at the moment when Listen to the Sea was unsheathed. The sword energy was boiling in the air, and the whole world was trembling. The infinite sword light surged in the east and the west, but the sword energy was incredibly from the same source. It was a different momentum, but it was almost the same sword chi and sword intent. The two sword energy converged in the air in an instant. The extremely powerful sword intent merged incredibly in an instant, and the power increased exponentially. In the black flame all over the sky, the two sword energy converged together like a rainbow, and instantly dispersed the flame all over the sky. Arisis's pupils suddenly contracted. In an instant, all the scenes in front of him disappeared completely, and there were only two sword lights left in the whole world. A blood-colored long sword flew in the air. A blood-colored flag whistled across the sky. Completely different weapons. It was the same sword intent. The same unique skill. 22nd blade break of the sky. A flag and a sword flew from different directions and crossed a distance of thousands of meters. Originally, it was not a joint sword, but when they merged together, it broke out in incredible power. The bright edge smashed the black flame all over the sky in the blink of an eye. The edge ran through the world, and the void was torn and broken inch by inch in the powerful sword light. The sword light spread. The black flame was broken. The peerless edge swallowed Arsis in an instant. It swallowed the chant of death in his hand. Li Honghe. There was a roar of extreme pain in the darkness. Wrapped by the bright sword light, Arisis's body instantly retreated. A blood-colored star flag directly stabbed into Arisis's abdomen. The flag fluttered and flew in the wind. Suddenly, two figures appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong calmly withdrew the long sword and did not look at Arsis. He just silently looked at the old man in front of him, with a complicated look in his eyes. Lin Fengting, who rushed to Zhongzhou State from Switzerland, also had a change in his eyes. The old man standing in the front no longer had the star flag in his hand. He stood in the void with his back to Lin Fengting and Wang Tianzong, and his whole body was surging with a kind of fighting intent and coldness that could almost suppress heaven and earth. That kind of crazy and fierce momentum suppressed Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting in the peak state. He was indomitable and unrestrained. And he could no longer restrain himself. He really could not restrain himself. Lin Fengting's eyes suddenly turned red. His body trembled, and he took a deep breath. Together with Wang Tianzong, he bowed deeply to the old man in front of him and said respectfully, "Seniorly, Li Honghe, who had been fighting on 13 battlefields in a day, was covered with blood. Instead of weakening, his aura was getting stronger and stronger." He slowly turned around, looked at Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting who were bowing in front of him, and then looked at Arsis who had retreated to the distance. After a while, he nodded and whispered, "He is wearing the holy garment of the Vatican, so he is not badly hurt. If we want to keep him in the chant of death, it is bound to be a long fight. It won't waste much time." Wang Tianzong straightened up and said. Lin Fengting did not speak. Arsis was the second on the divine list. Although he was seriously injured now, it was not fatal. It was not difficult to defeat him, but it was not easy to kill him even if the three of them joined forces. If Arsis wanted to run away, it would definitely be a problem. It won't waste much time. Do you still have time? Huading has been in chaos for a long time. Your people in East Island will also be wiped out. In the distance, Arsis said with a cold smile, his face pale. The holy garment of the Vatican on him, which was similar to a robe, was completely broken, but his voice was still full of energy. Li Honghe narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly said, "You go back to Huading. I'll deal with him." Senior Li. Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting said at the same time. "Don't say more. Hurry up. My current state. Hey. Hey." His voice was very low, and there was unspeakable misery in his self-mockery. "It's too late." Arsis whispered, and his figure disappeared into the void again. His voice came from all directions. "So what if you go back to Huading now? Don't you want the 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion? I lost, but there are still more than 200 experts from the 5 superpowers here. What do you have on the border of Jianghu state? As long as you dare to leave, the Blood Battalion will definitely disappear. You're bound to lose, ha ha ha. Swish. Li Honghe, whose aura was extremely strong, did not hesitate at all. He directly rushed toward the place where Arsis disappeared. He did not look back, but just calmly and indifferently ordered, "You go back to Huading. I'm here." After many years, they met again. In the face of Wang Tianzong, he did not talk about grievances. In the face of Lin Fengting, he did not talk about the inheritance. At this moment, Li Honghe seemed to go back to decades ago. He was the war god of Jianghu state. On the battlefield, there was only Jianghu state in his heart. You? Not enough. Who else? Who else? In Arisis's presumptuous laughter, the enemy on the ground and the battle team in the air gathered together. The experts of the thunder-shocking realm and fire-flaming realm from the 5 superpowers all appeared in the enemy's camp, and their killing intent kept spreading. Me too. Zhou Qiang from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. Qing Yi from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. Lu He from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. One voice after another suddenly sounded in the depths of the forest, shaking in the night sky like thunder. Dozens of figures appeared in the forest, men and women, old and young. Everyone was dressed in ragged coarse clothes. No one wore a military uniform, no one carried a military rank, and no one mentioned Jianghu state. They mentioned Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun and the Li family. To your highness. To the Li family. The hoarse roar sounded in the night sky in unison, to Li Honghe. These elites of the Li family, who had lingered on the border for many years, were finally willing to fight for the Li family. Only for the Li family. After all, the knot in their hearts had not been untied, and probably could not be untied. In the late night of the 5th day, the remaining Li family, with their glory that had long fallen into the dust, directly confronted the 5 dark forces in their heyday. How lonely the dark world without the Li family would be. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.